head blight suppression, as well as irrigation management, so that we can avoid that critical period during flowering where it's most susceptible to infection by Fusarium species. So Fusarium head blight, as Kelly said, is caused by a number of different Fusarium species. The big one, though, is Fusarium graminearum. That one is the most aggressive, and it also produces the highest levels of the mycotoxin DON that Kelly was talking about. And that's really what renders the grain unfit for human or livestock consumption if it's at high enough levels, and that's why the grading is so stringent on that, because it can be very harmful if you have high enough levels. So for this project, we're looking at 9 different cooperator fields kind of scattered out throughout southern Alberta, from north of Brooks to Bow Island, and then all the way over to Carmen Cave. So kind of a good cross section of what we have out here in southern Alberta. All of these are, as I said, irrigated. So we've been looking at fungicide applications where they are spraying their fungicide of choice and leaving a check strip, so that we can compare what exactly that fungicide is doing in terms of reducing the level of Fusarium in the field. All the fields have been stubble tested, and there is at least some level of Fusarium in that field. Some of them are definitely on the lower end, but some of them are quite high, so we get a nice cross section that way too. And then the other thing we've been doing is the irrigation management. So typically what happens is either we have a kind of a half and half situation where half of the pivot was actually run while the crop was flowering, and half of it didn't get any water during flowering. Or when that's not possible, sometimes depending on the field, you have an area where kind of a Pac-Man kind of look, where you have a little wedge that that is irrigated differently from the rest, so that we have that comparison. So in terms of the 2 years of results we've seen so far, both practices we demonstrated that they did reduce the amount of Fusarium in the harvested grain. We measured that using Fusarium damaged kernels, which is what they measure for Fusarium when they are grading the grain. And also in terms of yield, we looked at that as well, seeing if there were differences that way. I just have to check here. I want to get all these numbers straight because I don't have them off the top of my head. In 2010, the percentage of Fusarium damaged kernels was up to 5.5% lower in fungicide treatments than when compared with the area adjacent to it that did not receive a fungicide. And in 2011, it was 0.5%. So that goes to show the difference in conditions can really make a big difference as to how much protection that fungicide provides, and how big a difference you're going to see in your untreated check versus your treated area. Then where irrigation was avoided during flowering, the percent FDK was reduced by 3.9% in 2010 and 0.5 in 2011. So again, a similar type effect. DON levels, that's the mycotoxin that Fusarium graminearum, and I believe it's Fusarium calmorum is the other one?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that those two will produce in the grain, the infected grain, was reduced by up to 3.3 parts per million, which is a pretty significant decrease in 2010, and 0.7 ppm in 2011. Now you guys may be wondering, what happened in terms of yield, especially with avoiding irrigation during flowering. Did that have a big impact on your yields, or was it okay? Well, the biggest difference we saw was about a 5% drop, but that was definitely a lot bigger than most of them. Most of them, the yields were quite comparable. If you are managing your irrigation and you make sure you get it topped up right before that critical period, depending on conditions, you can usually get through without any significant reductions in yield. And then the other big thing that we noted, and we knew this going in, we just didn't know quite how much, was the difference between wheat classes and varieties. Obviously, some wheat classes in general are more susceptible to Fusarium head blight than others. So if you look at the handout that I passed around, the one with all the colors on it, that's a variety guide that shows the levels of susceptibility to Fusarium of all the different varieties within all the different classes. And you'll notice something like Durham, the varieties are either poor or very poor. So you're going to get a lot better of a response to these best management practices like fungicide use and avoiding irrigation during flowering than in something that's less susceptible, a class that's less susceptible. So we did see some pretty good results in Durham especially. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at implementing these best management practices. So now kind of on to the next part. We actually had a really good economic analysis done by Dale Khalil with Alberta Agriculture up in Edmonton. And he looked at the relationship between percent FDK reduction in the area that was either treated with fungicide or that had the reduced irrigation during flowering, and also the net benefit from either of those two practices. So that's what these charts are over here. I'll start with the irrigation one here. This one shows these were three different field years. So two of them were in 2010, one was in 2011. And it shows here that for two of them, just make that a little bit more visible, hopefully everybody can catch that. For two of them here, you see a big improvement in Fusarium damaged kernels. This one was 0.5%. This one was just shy of 4%. That's huge, huge, huge. And then this one, there was only a small improvement in Fusarium damaged kernels. But you notice that the net benefit in dollars per bushel was $1.80, $1.80 a bushel. Why? Because that small difference by the irrigation management made the difference between classes. He made a higher grade with it because of the irrigation management, and that's why you see the big net benefit. These two, they received frost damage, so even though there was a big improvement in Fusarium damaged kernels, they got frost in the fall of 2010, and the grade wasn't affected by that improvement because the frost kept it down. So that's the irrigation one. Then we have, this one is fungicide application in Durham. Sorry, this one was Durham crops as well. That's Durham there. And I'll just color in those dots so you can see them a little bit better. You'll notice that there's 5 dots on here. So we see that in all cases, fungicide application did cause an improvement in the percent Fusarium damaged kernels as compared to the untreated check. Now you'll notice that these ones are all kind of in the same area, and then this one's way out there. That one again was an issue with frost in the fall of 2010. Late crop, and it got caught by the frost. So that's why that one, the net benefit was actually negative because the fungicide application didn't show through because of frost in terms of the grade. These ones here, you'll notice a decent range here in improvement in FDKs, and but similar net benefits ranging from about $1.50 to $2 per bushel. And then the third one here, I didn't quite have the poster space or the board space. So this one is hard red spring with fungicide application.
Do you think a farmer's going to care about $2 a bushel on his crop? No.
This year.
Not this year. You got to pay income tax on it, right?
You get the big one on the middle of his nose, Kristina.
So you can see here, this isn't quite as positive looking as the Durham ones are, but again, frost. We really got caught in 2010. There were some late crops there, and we didn't quite make it. But you see that overall the improvement in Fusarium damaged kernels is lower than in the Durham. So that just goes to show you it makes a big difference what class you're growing and how susceptible the variety within that class is. You see that one, the net benefit wasn't quite as great either. It topped out at about $1 for the best one. So just goes to show you, you gotta watch. Best management practices are always great to do, but you always got to look at the economics of it too. Is it going to pay off? You can control the disease and you know how to do it, but you have to ultimately look at that bottom line and see if it's going to pay off. But again, this is only 2 years worth of data. We're really excited to see what the third year is going to tell us here, because we've had a little bit less rain than in the past couple years. It's dried out a bit better, and we should be able to get stuff off with the frost damage. And then the kind of the other part of this project, we're also doing each year 25 fields are randomly surveyed, about half and half dryland and irrigation, just to see what kinds of cultural practices, if we can identify any trends in terms of fusarium development in those fields, or if any practices are beneficial in reducing that. So far, we've kind of seen the obvious, a lot more likely to come across fusarium in an irrigated field than in a dryland one. We have seen a few dryland ones with it. Those ones typically have been fairly close to an intensively irrigated area, so likely the disease inoculum was in the area, and it's been moist enough these last couple years that it's been able to take off. But in a dry year, likely wouldn't be an issue because it wouldn't have the moisture it needs. In the last couple of years, we actually found that irrigation management played a bit smaller of a role than we expected to see. But when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Most of southern Alberta had some sort of rainfall event during flowering in 2010 and 2011. It was nice and moist, and so even if you were able to use those management practices and keep the pivot off during flowering, if you get a thunderstorm or two, that might give you the same effect as an irrigation. I mean, you can only do what you can do, and you got to play the hand that Mother Nature deals you. But yeah, we're hoping to see if that was a little different this year, if there was a more pronounced effect from irrigation management than in the past couple of years.